Today's the day. We've got a bunch of Surface hardware to talk about. Today, Microsoft pulled back the curtains on a bunch of new hardware, and that is what we're going to talk about right now. And so, rather than looking at my face, we are going to start diving into the hardware that Microsoft has talked about today, including the Pro 8, the Laptop Studio, just a bunch of stuff. Let's go ahead and get started with the Surface Pro 8. So, the Surface Pro line is the classic Surface hardware, and it was the first device, honestly, to create momentum for Microsoft. While there was the RT, the Pro is really sort of what put them on the map. And with the release of the Pro 8, the device is receiving what I think you could honestly say is probably the biggest update potentially since its release. I mean, you could argue that some ways, but here we are. So, this new device has 11th gen Intel chips. Nothing too surprising there. Everything from an i3 up to an i7. You can have Iris Xe graphics, all the way up to 32 gigs of RAM and 1 terabyte of storage. With those specs, Microsoft is really, kind of keeping it normal, but here's where things change quite a bit. Finally, we are getting Thunderbolt 4 with the Surface Pro 8. Thunderbolt 4, there are going to be 2 ports on the Surface Pro that will finally support Thunderbolt 4. This is a big change and just effectively unlocks a ton of new accessories. There's also a larger display. So the new Surface Pro, as we would expect, is aligning pretty much up to the Surface Pro X in size and dimensions for the display, meaning thinner bezels, a keyboard cover that can also dock the pen, so that is also an update. And Microsoft is saying that the display is 11% larger, has 10.8% higher resolution, and more importantly, at least for someone like me, 13% brighter. I love a really, really bright display. And the display officially measures in at 13 inches, but more importantly and most exciting is that it's going to have a 120 hertz refresh rate as well. So you get Thunderbolt 4, 120 hertz display. Of course, there's going to be TPM 2.0 for Windows 11 and all of that, but you're getting a larger display, thinner bezels, Thunderbolt 4, 120 hertz display. That's a pretty big update. And I honestly think that this device is going to sell pretty darn well for Surface fans. If you like a Surface Pro, this is going to be a good device that is worthwhile to upgrade to, especially if you're on something older than what was released last year. This is a pretty significant update. And so the Surface Pro 8 is going to start at $1,099, so that's not cheap, but pre-ordering is officially starting today. Now, other things I think people listening to this are going to be pretty interested in is the Surface Duo 2 is officially here. So the Pro 8 received a pretty good update, and I think the Duo 2 is receiving a pretty good update as well, but there's one major caveat which we will talk about here in a second. So with this update, the Surface Duo 2 now supports, or is now sporting, I should say, inside a Snapdragon 888 processor, 5G connectivity, a new triple camera setup, NFC for payments, a larger and brighter displays. The display is now 8.3 inches when it's in that open configuration for a resolution on that AM OLED display of 2688 by 1892 or a PPI of 401. But there's also something that's kind of neat. There's on the side of the Duo, it's not on the side, it's on the edge of the display. There's a new software update, I believe, that allows you to see, it's sort of like glance notifications, if you remember those from Windows Phone. When the Duo is closed, you can now see this edge of the display, and it will actually light up when ringing, and you can see if you have any notifications without actually opening the device, which is really, really handy. And the battery inside is 4,449 milliamp hours. That is a dual battery configuration. There are also 2 colors, which you can see by all the images. The dark color is what they're calling Obsidian, and the light color is continued to be Glacier. So you got dark and light there, light mode, dark mode, whatever you want to call it. Pricing is not cheap, as we would expect. It's going to be $14.99 and available in select markets, and pre-orders are opening up today. And so that is a pretty big update to the Surface Duo 2, but the major caveat here is going to be software support. That is the thing we don't know, because the first generation Duo has not exactly received a lot of love when it comes to software updates from Microsoft. It's got some trickle things here and there, but we didn't really see, it's almost running nearly 2-year-old version of Android at this point. And so Microsoft really needs to kind of get on it with the software updates, because for $1,500 you expect this thing to be running the latest and greatest versions of Android, but that's sort of that's where we're at. So We'll have to wait and see if the software is going to be upgraded continuously on the Duo 2, because that is a major outlier. One of the more interesting things before we get onto the hardware is Microsoft also announced this Surface Adaptive Kit. Now, this is the stickers is probably the best way to describe them, but they're decals or other things you can place on the Surface to make the hardware just a little bit more accessible, including pull tabs and making it easier to identify where ports are and everything else. It's a neat little addition, and so Microsoft has been really pushing the inclusiveness for their software and hardware, and this is just another way they're making their hardware kits a little bit easier to use for people who have challenges with either vision or your hands or anything else like that. It's a neat little thing that they announced today. Other things being announced before we get into the grand item of the day. Surface Go 3 and Pro X are also receiving some minor updates. So the Surface Go 3 is getting a new processor, the Pentium, well, I should say it's a new number for Surface Go 3. It's the Pentium Gold 6500Y, which is a dual core, and it can go up to a Core i3 10th gen 100Y CPU as well. Sadly, though, the storage on the baseline entry level is going to still be that eMMC storage at 64 gigs. It retains the same weight at 1.2 pounds. There's going to be LTE options, and it's going to start at $399. The storage is, the Surface Go is right for a very specific demographic. The Pentium Gold plus eMMC memory makes me still continue to be nervous. I wish Microsoft would really just put something great in there, because I do like the form factor, but the performance is just typically not there for my personal needs. Now, not my kid might be a little bit easier to use. Anyways, onto the Pro X side of the coin. There is a new Surface Pro X. Now, it's not really new, but it is new because Microsoft is now selling a Wi-Fi only model of the Pro X, which will cost $899, and so that is just lowering the entry point. On to the reason why probably many people are tuning into the Surface event or heading over to Microsoft.com is Microsoft has a new, what I'm calling their portable workstation, right? This is the Surface Book 3 right in front of me, but Microsoft is not announcing the Surface Book 4. They're announcing the spiritual successor to the Surface Book lineup, what they are calling the Surface Laptop Studio. Now, this is effectively like an all-in-one PC laptop workstation. It's the brainchild if you took a Surface laptop, a Surface Studio, and a Surface Pro, and they all got together and had a baby. And that's a weird analogy, but if they did, it would look like this device right here. So the Surface Laptop Studio, like I said, is the new workstation from Microsoft, and keep that in mind because Microsoft put a lot of effort and thought and specs under the hood. So first up are the specs. The Laptop Studio is using a quad-core 11th gen Intel chip that spans everything from the i5 11300H to the i7 1137H. So these are all H models, which are going to give you some improved performance. And the GPU is either the Iris Xe or RTX 3050 Ti for the consumer models, depending on your specific SKU. And then the commercial solution here is the RTX A2000. So think Quadro line of cards there. The display on the Laptop Studio is a 14.4-inch Pixel Sense Flow touch display with a resolution of 2400 by 1600, a 120 hertz refresh rate, which makes me so happy. Supports Dolby Vision 10-point multi-touch, 3.2 aspect ratio that we see typically on Surface devices is there. And much like the Surface Pro, and this makes me so happy, there are 2 Thunderbolt 4 connections. You also have Surface Connect, a headphone jack, but it doesn't appear that there's an SD card reader, which is a bit of a bummer. And like other devices in the Surface family, by the way, much like the Surface Pro line, the SSD is removable, so this is a really good thing. Means it's a bit more serviceable. And keep in mind that you can equip this thing with up to 2 terabytes of storage, so you can really jack up the MSRP on this thing if you really want. Now, with this device, Microsoft is claiming 19 hours of battery life for the i5 model and 18 hours for the Core i7. Having used Surface hardware nearly daily for many years, I can tell you that those numbers are probably a bit inflated. I would cut them in half, and that would give you a really respectable and reasonable estimation for what you're typically going to do. Now, if you're going to use this thing and just watch YouTube straight, you could probably get 18 hours, but not most of us are not going to do that. We're actually going to do work on this thing because it can drive external displays with those Thunderbolt connections. It's a really interesting device because Microsoft says that there are 3 modes, as they call them, for the Laptop Studio. So the first is laptop mode, which is pretty self-explanatory. So laptop mode looks like a laptop. Next is stage mode. that pulls the display forward, and it's ideal for gaming or just presenting or just honestly making the screen the most relevant thing that you're looking at, and it kind of hides the keyboard. Think of it sort of like a Surface Pro setup, something along those lines. And then the third mode is Studio mode, that is designed for using the device like a digital canvas, and the Surface Pen can actually be stored on the bottom of this device, which we'll talk about here in a second. But you can see now where the Studio portion comes in because it lays sort of flat, and you can use it like, well, the Surface Studio. And then you also have the Pro style-ish mode where it's up, and that's like display. And then you have the traditional laptop. So Microsoft is crossing off 3 different styles of device with the Laptop Studio, and this is why I'm calling it a portable workstation, because when you look at the specs and what the device is capable of doing, it's not your entry-level device, and the fact that it's replacing the Surface Book in the lineup means that it is at the top of the rung of the ladder for everything from what Microsoft is calling performance and obviously pricing. So this is a big deal at the end of the day for Microsoft, because this is going to be the hero product for the Surface family going forward. And so I want to get to the elephant at the bottom of the jungle, if you will. So much like the Surface Book design, which had a teardrop shape, and it was sort of controversial, might be overselling it, but it was either you liked it or you respected it or whatever. The Surface Laptop Studio is following right down that heritage lane, because on the bottom of the device, or the bottom of the device, is like a step design. So it's not just, you typically have like a laptop deck where your hands go and that's it. Not on the Laptop Studio. It's actually like a stepped design where it almost looks like it's sitting on top of a laptop cooler on your desk or something like that. I mean, you can see here from the image above of what I am talking about. Now, this is going to be the point of discussion, I think, for many people when it comes to this device. Is this a good design? Is this something Microsoft engineers just couldn't figure out how to get it thin and light? I don't quite have the answer yet, but obviously they included it because they felt that they need it, and that you can see all the ventilation holes there. This is very clearly related to cooling the device and making sure it remains happy and healthy and not overheating, and it's up for discussion. Now, one of the big benefits between the Laptop Studio and say the Book series is that all of the components, minus the display obviously, are down in the base, which should really help with lappability, as we call it in the industry, because with the previous gen device, a lot of the components were up in the display, which meant it was top heavy and you would get some wobbling action with it just on your legs. So by putting all this stuff down in the base like a traditional laptop, it really should help out with that, which I don't know if that explains why everything is so chunky boy down there, but it's a look. Until we get some really in-depth hands-on time with this for multiple weeks, I suspect it's not going to be that big of a deal and you just kind of get used to it. But keep in mind, this device is not tiny. So dimensions are 12.7 inches by 9 inches by 0.7 inches in height. It also weighs as much as 4 pounds. So this is not a thin and light ultra portable. But if it does truly replace your laptop and potentially a drawing tablet and a Surface Pro, if it can combine all those things into one, then it's easier to justify, because hey, you're only carrying one device and it's doing so many things, and so you don't have to worry about the weight. Now, we also have to be concerned about, is this a jack of all trades, master of none? Because that again is going to be a defining feature. If Microsoft just did a bunch of things okay and nothing exceptionally well, that's not as good. And so the thing that I really like here, is this is showing that Microsoft honestly is trying. They're iterating, right? They took the Surface Book design and clearly they decided this may not be the best path forward. Our customers are saying X and we're delivering Y, and so let's change up the formula. And this is what keeps Surface interesting, is that Microsoft is willing to try these things on their hero devices, and they don't ship them in limited quantities. I mean, this is a mass market product at the end of the day, and so this is what keeps me so interested in Surface, and I would expect that it's pretty high quality stuff. I know there's definitely people who are going to write in the comments, be like, well, my Surface Pro cracked or whatever. I mean, it does happen, but Microsoft hardware is typically, it's made of metal, it's not cheap chintzy plastic, and so I would expect that the Laptop Studio will feel in that high quality avenue, just like everything else that typically comes out of Surface. So there's also everything else in the Laptop Studio like you would expect that make it corporate friendly. So it has Windows Hello or removable SSD, TPM 2.0, Surface Connect, which is super important for a lot of corporate worlds, which I think is going to be one of the target demographics, especially because this includes the A2000 GPU from NVIDIA, which means that Microsoft is explicitly targeting a work class type machine. Now, obviously with the 3050 Ti, which a little underperforming there, to be honest. I would love to see something a little bit higher from this device, but as you can tell, Microsoft is targeting just a higher caliber than something like the Surface Laptop or what something like the Surface Pro delivers. So the Surface Laptop Studio will be starting at $1599, and you can ratchet that price up all the way up to whatever your budget can or can't afford, and you can leverage credit to buy it, I'm sure. But it's an interesting device. I'm optimistic that it's different. Now, we have to be like fully transparent here. Microsoft isn't the first to come out with this type of a laptop design. We have seen this from other vendors like HP, I believe it was their Folio. And so Microsoft isn't technically the first to do this, but they are doing it in a way that it's different. It will definitely stand out. It does have a side profile shot when it is in studio mode that only a designer who built the thing could love, but it's definitely looks more functional than form, if that is making sense here. When you look at the step design, you look at the side profile, you look at everything that Microsoft is delivering with the Laptop Studio. I am super interested in it. I'm interested to see how artists and people in the field actually use this, if they can use this. Is it too heavy? Does it have the performance that is needed to run those high intensive applications when it comes to drawing and modeling and everything else? We'll find out. We will find out. But this is just day one. Microsoft has just announced the Laptop Studio. We've got the Pro 8, we've got the Duo 2, we've got the Go 3, we've got the new Pro X. There's a new recycled mouse from plastics out of the ocean. There's just a smattering of stuff. Microsoft really refreshed a lot of their stuff. They didn't touch the Surface Laptop. That is one of the outliers that was not touched, and obviously the Surface Studio was not touched either. No Surface Studio 3 yet announced from Microsoft, so we're not sure what's going on there. Anyways, most of the things in the Microsoft world were refreshed, so if you've been looking at buying a new PC for this holiday season, this is the time to be looking at what Microsoft has. Obviously, all this stuff will support Windows 11 out of the box. That is the big deal. Microsoft is aligning Windows 11 with these new hero products like the Pro 8 and the Surface Laptop Studio. I want to call it the Studio Laptop Studio. And so there you go. That is a wrap up of everything that Microsoft announced today. We'll have more deep dives and everything else. So as always, if you want to stay updated on what's happening in the world of Microsoft and hardware, make sure to keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this channel is me.